This is the Outlap F1 podcast featuring America's own Cody, Andy, and Deanna. Your one-stop shop for Formula One news, insights, race previews, and reviews. Join us on the Outlap. Wow, did we ever need one of those? Hello and welcome back on in. This is season 8, episode number 8 of the Outlap F1 podcast. It's our 2026 Miami GP review show. You've got Andy. I'm along with Cody tonight, and it's a little bit after the race ended, but Cody, man, boy, we needed one of those. That was fun.
Yeah, that was definitely the best race weekend so far this year. Really enjoyed the race. Really enjoyed actually most of the weekend. First time that I've actually enjoyed qualifying so far this year, really. And, you know, the sprint race was, but, you had something to be excited about from that, which we'll get into. All around, yeah, definitely feeling a little bit better about the season.
Yeah. Positive vibes, I think, aplenty for a lot of drivers. Not for everybody, but we'll get into all that in just a little bit. But you have found our show, as always. Welcome along. We're ever so glad you are here. You can find us on X, on Instagram, Discord, Reddit, and, of course, here on YouTube. At Outlap F1 Podcast is the handle for all of those places. If you enjoy what you're watching, as I hope we're going to actually have video for this one, and you enjoy what you're listening to, click either the like or subscribe button on YouTube so you can stay current with when we do put our content out. If you're on a favorite podcasting app, we're glad you're listening on those channels as well. A 5-star review will also help us come up a little bit better in F1 content like this kind of search results. If you'd like to share a thought with us, you can email the show anytime you want. outlapf1@gmail.com will get your thoughts to us. Thank you so much to Outlap F1 Nation, who continues to help us out in all sorts of fun ways. Thank you so much. And y'all know the list. And we've got a couple newbies in here. To Dean Warwick, Yuri Dolchester, Paul Weaver, Quentin Warden, Kevin Kelly, Regan Stanzik, Timothy Brown, Jonathan Scott, Rachel Fleming, and now Dave Doherty as well. If you'd like to support our show and our little endeavor, you can buy us some coffee. We are F1 fans in America, so God knows we need caffeine. So you can find our link. It's buymeacoffee.com/outlapf1. You can give whatever you'd like to do. We will happily take it. Thank you so much to those who have taken advantage of that. All right, particulars out of the way. Cody, I'll let you go first here. Headline of the day, what you got?
All right, my headline is, you thought it would be different this time. And for a little while, it was. We had some different people at the front. We had Lando Norris take the sprint pole and sprint race win. We had Max Verstappen back on the front row for regular qualifying. And we had Charles Leclerc once again taking the lead out of the first turn. After all that was said and done, though, by the end of the race, it was Kimi Antonelli taking his third win in the row, making it look like Mercedes. I don't know if they'll win everything this year because, it seems like it just keeps getting closer and closer so far, but they are still the team to beat.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely part of me that said, well, boy, everybody just took their best shot with all the updates. Mercedes didn't really bring a whole lot, and it really didn't matter in the end. And maybe that's discouraging, but I'm more of the positive. And my headline of the day is, we all needed that. And I've said this before about Formula One. It has this uncanny ability to do this. It's at a track that nobody really likes. It's coming off of a break that nobody enjoyed for lots of different reasons. The social media discord over the last month is, my God, they just didn't do enough over the rules to fix this thing. It's getting, every sports car broadcast has taken their shot at Formula One. And I just kind of sat here and had to take it. And I go, guess what? That was fun. I enjoyed that race. The sport delivered yet again when it needed to. Is it perfect? By no means, yes. By no means is it close to perfect yet. Are there things that they can fix and we'll tweak and talk about? Of course there are. But as for not having Formula One for a good 5 weeks, a little bit of a hiatus, that was a pretty fun reset, if I do say so myself. And Kimi Antonelli, man, he earned this one. This one was not easy. He had to fight for it. He had to defend from it. A lot of things. It was, you look at the end result and you go, okay, well, that kind of figures given where he started. But if you actually follow the story of the race, this one was no walk in the park. He had to fight for it. And I am encouraged from what I saw from those who not necessarily did get the win, but were a heck of a lot closer than what we saw earlier on in the season for sure. And that was, I think, your top four. This could be quite the fight if it actually shapes out like it could do, but we'll get into that. But before we do that, we have to go through all of our sessions. We start all the way back on the Friday with the sprint qualifying, and I did tee up the sound. Let's see if I can actually get it to work when I click it. Hey. All right. So not setting lap times or classified lap times for the sprint shootout. Those were the two Aston Martins. Now, the bad news was they didn't make it out very much on Friday. The good news for Aston Martin, they have fixed the vibration problem. They are no longer having to run restricted lap counts or any of that stuff. They can finish the races. They can actually learn about their race car, finally, 3 months in. But classified finishers in the sprint shootout, P20 was Valtteri Bottas, P19 was Alex Albon, P18 was Sergio Perez, P17 Esteban Ocon, P16 was Liam Lawson. P15 was Arvid Lindblad, P14 was Carlos Sainz, P13 was Ali Behrman, P12 was Nico Hülkenberg, P11 was Gabriel Bortoleto, P10 was Pierre Gasly, P9 Isaac Hadjar, P8 was Franco Colapinto, P7 was Lewis Hamilton, P6, this was a shocker, especially given Mercedes' form. George Russell only managing P6 in the sprint shootout. P5, updated Red Bull, better, but not quite all the way there yet. Max Verstappen in the Red Bull comes home P5. P4 was Charles Leclerc. P3 was Oscar Piastri. P2 was Kimi Antonelli. And P1, this is his happy hunting ground, apparently. Lando Norris in the McLaren, a 1:27.869, the sprint shootout pole position. All right. Cody, big thoughts here. This was our first meaningful session after what I thought was a great idea, the 90-minute practice. Let's do that for every sprint race because I thought it made the rest of the sessions better. But anyway, what's your thought?
It was definitely warranted here. And, we talked about how many upgrades teams were bringing after this long hiatus. So the extra practice time for the sprint weekend was definitely warranted this time. But yeah, I think it just made everything better. The team seemed very prepared. We didn't see such, and it's kind of hard to tell exactly what is the cause for everything better that we saw this weekend. We did see some tighter margins at the front for qualifying pretty much right out of the get-go here. Whether that was, teams bringing their upgrades, so they're more competitive, whether that was the regulation changes that we've seen, or whether that was the fact that Miami is just a better track as far as the energy deployment goes. Maybe it's a little bit of everything, but we did see things more competitive at the front. And this was where we got our first little taste of hope because we had the first competitive session that was not won by Mercedes. We got to see Lando back at the front for the first time since last year. It was, really nice to see somebody not in a silver car up at the front. And it gave me some hope going through the weekend and for the rest of the season, honestly, that maybe Mercedes won't just win everything if we're lucky. I also had a little bit more hope for Max Verstappen going into this because they were bringing a lot of upgrades, just like a lot of other teams. And I was kind of like, they're pretty far off. I wonder how much it's actually going to help. Well, it turns out it helped out quite a bit because Max Verstappen put in a pretty solid time in the practice session. I think he was the second fastest in practice. And, practice is practice. You take that with a grain of salt. But he definitely looked a little more confident in the car right out of the gate here in sprint qualifying. And he did comfortably get into, Q3, which hadn't always been the case so far this season. So, yeah, the fact that he made it up to 5, I was like, I had been messaging you. I was like, I don't want to get too optimistic. And then once they got into Q3 and he was actually kind of falling off a little bit, I was like, all right, good feeling gone. But
I was ready to give you like the 100% versus what his delta was because I'm like, you should actually feel pretty good because if they were almost a second off in Japan, they more than like 3/4 got it back or pulled it back here. Mm-hmm. Not to mention the updates that some of these guys have brought. Red Bull, I thought, with the wing in the back,
Oh,
you
that
could kick a
wing is
soccer ball
wet.
through that thing.
It's like the reverse Macarena wing and then some, because yes, it flips in the opposite direction, and the gap that it makes, yeah, it looks like I could just like dive through that. It's enormous and a little
Exactly.
goofy looking, but also kind of cool.
But it's effective. It was
Yeah.
definitely effective in the straight. And the only thing that I would say about this was, and you'll see it when we get to the main qualifying. What McLaren got the jump on of everybody else was they were deploying it actually in different places, according to some of the traces. They were focusing on the first sector and kind of letting the rest of the deployment kind of bleed out over the course of the lap, where I know Antonelli and also a large extent Max Verstappen were also trying to get that, save up the max deployment for the long straight right at the end, right before the last turn. That turned out to not be the preferred way to go about it. And you see it when we get to main qualifying. Everybody caught on and it flipped. But both Lando and Oscar were setting some amazing first sectors and holding on to the rest of the lap. And that's basically what allowed them to do it. Antonelli came out right at the end, certainly gave Lando a run for his money. It was not anything easy, but we did finally have a non-Mercedes at the top. A bit of a surprise to see George Russell in P6. Apparently, he thinks this is like his bogey track, which is kind of surprising, but everyone has to think the tracks that they don't necessarily get on with. Maybe this is it for him. For the amount of updates that Ferrari brought, and they looked pretty good in the first practice, you got to say this was kind of a bit of a disappointment with 4th and 7th for Leclerc and for Hamilton. They're in the fight. Like it comes down very much to, again, how they were deploying, and I don't think they got on the same program along with everybody else early. Struggle buses. We talked about the Astons. The first thing we kind of noticed is they didn't bring any car part updates. Their entire break was focused on fixing that vibration problem. And it looks like, from all the reporting that I read about it, that has now been addressed. So now they are at level 0. And oh, by the way, we're 4 rounds into the season. So you could just imagine how they could still potentially get better now that they can actually focus on something other than the fact that the engine doesn't want to kill their drivers.
Now, all that said,
it was still bad.
But it was really bad. I mean, both Aston Martins in sprint qualifying were slower than the 100% rule, 107% rule. So they had to be given permission to take part in the sprint. And I believe I was reading that the best qualifying time in F2 was actually still faster than the Aston Martin. So that's pretty bad. But yeah, let's hope that now that they are taking care of the reliability of their engine woes, that maybe they'll actually start being able to put some performance in that thing.
Yeah. All right. So we will move on into the sprint on Saturday. What turned out to be the same time as we were going to end up with the race on Sunday. But I'm like, oh, a nice little Saturday morning, little sprint. This was not a bad way to start your morning off. And that thing saw. All right. Unfortunately, having a technical infringement with his floor and not being able to take part after the sprint actually ended was Gabby Bortoleto. He was disqualified. Your non-classified finishers in the sprint were Arvid Lindblad in the Racing Bull and Nico Hulkenberg, the beginning of a very painful weekend in the Audi. P19 was Valtteri Bottas. P18 was Alex Albon. P17, Lance Stroll. So there's race pace somewhere in that Aston Martin, somewhere. P16 was Sergio Perez. P15, hey, look at that. That's Fernando Alonso in the other Aston Martin. P14 was Liam Lawson. P13, Carlos Sainz. P12 was Ali Behrman. P11 was Esteban Ocon. P10, Franco Colapinto. P9 was Isaac Hadjar. The points finishers in the sprint: P8, Pierre Gasly in the Alpine. P7 was Lewis Hamilton. P6 was Kimi Antonelli. We'll talk about what happened to him. P5 was Max Verstappen, a solid finish there. P4 was George Russell, a bit of a recovery from the qualifying. P3, Charles Leclerc. But in the sprint, it was papaya dominance early. I was getting probably a little more excited than I should have been. Oscar Piastri, P2, and Lando Norris takes pole position and converts it into a sprint victory for the McLaren team. All right. Cody, big thoughts from the sprint.
We had a little more hope in the sprint race because McLaren was looking really good. They pretty much ran away with it, and that was what I had told you before the race, that I figured Lando was just going to have a good start off the line and pretty much romp away with it, and that was really pretty much what happened. Oscar had to fight for it a little more, but they did end up coming away with the 1-2. Honestly, in my opinion, not the most exciting sprint, and I've stated several times before, especially over the last couple of years, that Miami is not my favorite track. I tend to find at the races here a little on the dry side. I also I can get into the Las Vegas spectacle, but they kind of try to do that with Miami too, and it's not really my thing. So, definitely not my favorite, and I was kind of feeling that way after the sprint race here because I was like, it's just pretty much whoever's out in front is running away with it again. But at least once again, at least it wasn't George Russell and it wasn't Kimi Antonelli. We got to see Lando out of the front, and that was really good because you really hate to see it when someone becomes champion and then they go into the next season right away and they're just nowhere. And kind of had a little bit of worry about that due to the regulation change. Same thing when Max won in 2021. I was like, well, shit, we're going into these new regs. He might be nowhere, and that would kind of take some of the wind out of the number one on his car. But yeah, at the very least, we're seeing McLaren continuing to improve the car, continuing to fight better, and this time they actually came away with maximum points from the sprint race.
Yeah, I think I had the meme of the champ is here. I think I put 4 different places on different social media that I had during the sprint because it was good to see. And for a guy who had lots of reliability problems, and when he finally got out of the garage this weekend, had a nice smooth practice for the first time probably all year. Both McLarens kind of did. Really kind of a ho-hum, got off the line and managed to start and figured it out and managed to bring it home. Not a ton of craziness in the sprint, if I'm honest about it. Not always the best topography for at least a sprint. Everyone was kind of on the same tires. There wasn't a whole lot of variability. There was some drama, in the back. Poor Nico Hulkenberg, his engine blew up as he was trying to get to the grid. So yeah, they had some drama there. But and maybe I think the more drama in the sprint was actually in the back where there weren't any points. You saw Fernando Alonso go from the back, basically back row up to P15. That was pretty cool for them. Same thing with Lance Stroll. But yeah, I mean, kind of pretty much where you kind of started was where you were expecting to finish. There was no big change really in the points other than, Pierre Gasly getting the single point for P8, which was, I think, significant for Alpine at least. But yeah, I mean, at this point I was, trying to vibe and all right, let's just keep this rolling for qualifying. And then reality kind of sets in.
That it did. Well, I mean, reality kind of set in a much better way for me once we got to regular qualifying.
Yeah, no. So let's just hop straight into it. So we took our little break. It was nice and hot and muggy out for everybody who was there. And then we transitioned into regular qualifying, and that saw. All right. So the FIA has had quite the weekend, actually. Over 100 different decision documents that I saw on their website. One of them, unfortunately, was to disqualify Isaac Hadjar, whose floor was also outside of the regulations. So that was kind of strange. But P21 was Gabby Bortoleto. P20 was Sergio Perez. P19 was Valtteri Bottas. P18 was Lance Stroll. P17 was Fernando Alonso. 10 seconds they found between the sprint, shootout, and disqualifying. Look at that progress. P16 was Arvid Lindblad. P15 was Alex Albon. P14 was Esteban Ocon. P13 was Carlos Sainz. P12 was Ali Behrman. P11 was Liam Lawson. The top 10 from 10 to 1. Nico Hulkenberg may have had a bad sprint, but they put that car together and he gets it into Q3. Nico Hulkenberg, P10 on the day. P9 was Pierre Gasly. P8 was Franco Colapinto. P7, Oscar Piastri. That was a surprise, especially given the 1-2 in the sprint. P6 was Lewis Hamilton. P5 was George Russell. Still kind of on a struggle bus here. P4 was Lando Norris, not able to replicate the same effort in qualifying as in the sprint. P3 was Charles Leclerc. P2, probably the shocker of qualifying that probably had Cody and all of Max Verstappen Nation all of a sudden sat up and went, say what? Max Verstappen back to the front row, a 127.964, but he left it till the very end, and it worked. Kimi Antonelli pips it in the last seconds, a 127.798 to claim pole position. A very interesting and fun qualifying. Kind of was at least for my guys, it was a bit of a nightmare because they almost screwed up like twice. But anyway, Cody, I'll let you go first. What you got?
So obviously the big thing for me here is that, holy crap, where did Max Verstappen come from? It was really kind of a massive turnaround compared to the sprint event. You had suddenly McLaren kind of back where they were before, kind of in the middle of the front runners. And you had Mercedes back toward the front. You had Charles Leclerc, doing very well. But yeah, Max Verstappen was quite impressive in this qualifying. And I was having a great time just sending you GIFs throughout each session, because it started off with him doing, pretty well in Q1. And I was like, all right, that's pretty good. And then
I wanted to send you back and said that was first qualifying. They're all unused tires, and I didn't do it. I'm glad I didn't.
That is
I would have
true.
looked stupid.
And then, well, it was funny because they said that they're all unused tires, and I was like, it's still pretty good. And then out of the beginning of Q2, when everyone started on the fresh tires, he was back down around like P5, and I was like, okay, reality is setting back in. But then he ends up topping Q2, and I was like, tormented, because I was like, oh man, they're giving me hope that he could be a contender for pole, and I just don't think that's how it's going to play out in Q3. And then lo and behold, they're going around doing their last laps. No one is improving, and no one is improving by a significant margin. Like pretty much everyone was off of their best time on their last run by several tenths, except for Max Verstappen and Kimi Antonelli. Max gets within, what is it, like a little over 1/10, I think, off of pole, which just blew my mind. I was sitting there on the edge of my seat being like, oh my God, he might actually get pole. And he didn't quite get there, but I was still real happy with what we got. Front row start on the inside going into that, close first turn to the right. I figured he had a pretty good shot at getting the lead. Whether he was going to keep it or not, I had no idea at that point, but it still was having me ride pretty high.
Yeah, and I would say that Max and Kimi Antonelli and a lot of the drivers in the top 5 and 6, I think, all went to the McLaren school of how you qualify around here, because all of a sudden I'm watching purple sector 1, purple sector 1, purple sector 1, somebody else, purple sector 1, somebody else. They were all figured out how to do that deployment, and it showed up in the lap time. The thing that shocked me was McLaren had it, and then I don't know what they did with their setup. I don't know if they were more worried about the potential for weather coming in on Sunday, and they were kind of guarding against that, but it was like, where did their advantage go? And then the sessions were not exactly straightforward. Oscar Piastri is lucky to be in P7. He could have easily been P16 because he only survived Q1 by 0.2 of a second, and you gotta love his humor when the engineer comes on and says, "Yeah, we're safe," and he goes, "Yeah, if you want to call this circumstance safe, I guess you could say that." And then in Q2, Lando has, I think, his first flying lap get deleted, and he ended up having to go out on. He was not on the preferred set of tires when he was trying to set his flyer. I think it was only good enough for like P9, good enough to get into the top 10. And he put it together finally, I think, for the last lap, his first flyer, because nobody did well, like you said earlier. Max Verstappen and Kimi Antonelli were the only two that improved at all on their first flyer. But Kimi Antonelli leaving it to the very end. And I mean, he crossed the line with, I think, like 2 seconds left on the clock to get his final flyer in. So it was very tight margins. Felt a lot like last year in terms of just a little bit of execution here, a little bit of execution there. And it was good. Like, for me, it's good that other people were in this fight, that it wasn't just a McLaren/Mercedes top 4 going at it. I'm glad to see Max Verstappen in the mix for stuff. It tells me the one thing it told me was whoever their test driver is, that dude should get a bonus because not only did they figure out all the updates in the first one, but to go from the sprint where they were good but not elite to all of a sudden now Max is knocking on the door at pole. It's him dragging that car and the team doing a great job for a lot. We've been hammering on Red Bull pretty much all year. Like, oh my God, this feels like the brain drain. Everyone's leaving. It's going to be tough times ahead. Maybe not. Hold the phone. Max has something to say about that, and it was impressive.
Hopefully it's not just Max soon. Hopefully Red Bull can remember how to properly install their upgrades onto the second car.
The other one.
Because apparently that was what caught Isaac Hadjar's car out, is that apparently Red Bull is claiming that it was a misinstallation of the floor parts, and that's what caused things to go beyond the acceptable dimensions. So yeah, a little bit of a silly mishap there. Hopefully that doesn't happen again, but at least it's a start.
Yeah, but I mean, but I think the thing that I take away from this is, one, this felt like a qualifying session again. Was it perfect? Is there still part of the lap where I start to hear that whine of the engine? Yes, but at least here I kept saying, well, as soon as you start to hear it, there would be a turn. So they would have to gear out of it or something like that. So it really kind of helped out that I think we had the topography that we did for these cars here. But it didn't feel, I didn't leave it thinking, oh my God, that was painful to watch. Like you didn't see the car slowing down in weird parts of it. You saw evolution of lap time. And I think they only are maybe about a second and a half off at the end of the day from where they were last year. Cause I think it was a 126. It's a bit 126 or so, 126.2. So this is like a 1.5.
That was something I was very surprised by in all this, is you and I were quite a ways off with our qualifying predictions because, we figured, okay, they've been a few seconds off, and these regulation changes are expected to make the cars slower in qualifying because of the, less that they can, the smaller amount that they can maximum charge up to, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We thought they were going to be slower, and still they're only, like you said, about a second and a half off from where they were last year, which is pretty impressive, honestly.
Yeah. So one of the things that actually came out, and we in our preview, we tried to do a good job of trying to explain what all the rule changes were, and we had with what we knew. They also have the option to go back and give an extra megajoule back in the circuits that aren't energy necessarily what they call energy starved. So you got your 8 megajoule qualifying with all the rest of the stuff in here. So this was still kind of the Japan show, but it worked better because this track was definitely not so energy starved. And I think that also helped the lap time delta out significantly. All right. So we now had our grid set for Sunday. We were all ready to start at 4:00 local time. And God said, hang on, I have a thought here. We told you, I was trying to tweet this out. I said, they are going to have a meeting at the end of Saturday to determine whether or not they're going to move the race. And I think cooler heads prevailed. And so they did. And so it came out late Saturday night. They were going to move the race 3 hours up. So basically almost at the same time of the sprint from the day before. It did rain really significantly in the morning. Heavy thunder, heavy lightning, had shelter in place. I saw at the venue, all of that. There's a brilliant shot of as Lando's walking in. They did not plan this. He's going, yeah, we'll have to see on the weather. Big thunder of lightning goes in the background. And then the announcement comes on that says, we're telling everybody to shelter in place. And Lando goes, yeah, that. So it was actually pretty good that, the timing. But that's where the bulk of the rain was. So that the track had actually, F2 was wet. And the F2, by the way, can we have more F2 in America, please? Because those two races, the sprint race and the main race, were bonkers. And I loved every minute of it. But anyway, neither here nor there. But we ended up having the start at high noon, at least for us here in the Central Time Zone. It was 1:00 Eastern. So it was bright daylight. The track had kind of dried up. We actually started and finished on dry tires. So we will start, as we are always apt to do, with our back markers. And our non-classified finishers were Isaac Hadjar in the Red Bull, Pierre Gasly, who literally went upside down and came back in the Alpine, Liam Lawson, who helped Pierre Gasly go upside down through actually no fault of his own because his car just kind of wouldn't let him turn. And poor Nico Hulkenberg yet again, managing only 7 laps. A very tough weekend. Welcome to Audi, Alan McNish. Ouch. Your classified finishers start with Valtteri Bottas in the Cadillac in P18. P17 was Lance Stroll. P16, Sergio Perez. P15, Fernando Alonso. Also significant for Aston Martin. P14, Arvid Lindblad. And P13, Esteban Ocon. Both Aston Martins finishing a race for the first time all season, I think, is very significant for them. I know it doesn't look, they're still at the bottom of all the tables, but that has to be something, given where they were. Probably the biggest thing I see here in the back markers. But what you got?
Yeah, the back marker finishers are pretty much what we were expecting up to this point. Still, Cadillac, Aston Martin. It is kind of sad to see, Esteban Ocon this far back, considering Haas started off pretty strong this year, and they seem to be kind of falling, as they are apt to do. It seems year after year, these last bunch of years, they start off pretty strong, and then everyone starts bringing upgrades, and they kind of fall towards the back. So Esteban Ocon, 13th, I guess not awful, but when you're, competing for when those last 4 positions are almost, the territory of Cadillac and Aston Martin until further notice, it doesn't look super great. So hopefully Haas can, make some upgrades and move back up. Isaac Hadjar, had a bit of a rough weekend, fair to say. He was pretty far off of Max in the qualifying sessions. He ended up, getting disqualified from the sprint. Was that the qualifying? Yeah, he got disqualified from the regular qualifying session because of the issue with vehicle dimensions, as we mentioned before. But he goes into this race probably wanting to make some early moves because he's starting from the pit lane, and just 4 laps in, makes a turn too early, clips the barrier at the turn, and breaks the suspension on his car, goes right to the wall. And man, he was frustrated. He was sitting there pounding on the wheel, kind of like throwing up his hands at the car after he got out. He knew, you could tell he knew it was his fault, his error, and it was pretty crushing to see. Isaac Hadjar does seem to be a very passionate person, very passionate driver. When he makes a mistake, he lets it show, his anguish at the moment. And so I did feel bad for him for that. Hopefully he can do the same thing that he did, last year and move on from that, because, we got to remember Isaac Hadjar didn't even really get to start the first Grand Prix last year, and he ended up making a pretty good year out of it. So, hopefully he bounces back from this. He gets on top of, the new version of the Red Bull car and comes back swinging. The last one with Pierre Gasly, that accident looks pretty nasty in hindsight. The way they cut to it on the broadcast, they just show his wheel hanging, his car is hanging all cockeyed on the tire barrier. And I was like, what the hell happened? And he got clipped on the inside by Liam Lawson, pretty much hit him right on the right spot, I guess, at that back tire to throw the car up, kind of in a similar way to maybe what we saw between Lewis and Max all those years ago. And, it was enough to completely flip him over and then throw him on top of the barrier there. Fortunately, the car landed right side up, so he was able to get out without much issue and was okay. Very good to see that. But still a little bit of an oddball crash.
Yeah, I mean, both the Hadjar and the Gasly incidents reminded me of some races past. The Hadjar one is almost a carbon copy of the Leclerc qualifying crash at in Baku, where he's like, that was the famous "I am stupid" line where Leclerc's getting out, and then basically had the same reaction: pound on the steering wheel and make it feel better. The Gasly one is reminiscent of a wreck I saw in Bahrain in 2014. I think it was Esteban Gutierrez in the Sauber. The same type of situation. They're coming into that first hairpin, and you just hit the car at that exact sweet spot, and it just takes off. and it took off and flipped and landed. I mean, luckily for Pierre, he walks away, none the worse for wear. All the safety gear did everything it was supposed to do. And you got to also feel for Liam Lawson because he was basically a passenger. His gearbox was doing all sorts of really terrible things to itself down that back straight. And he could not, like, you're watching him try to get the wheel, like, I'm going to hit you and I can't stop. And blam. So you kind of felt really bad. And Lawson, to his credit, walked down to the Alpine garage and apologized to Gasly because he was not trying to wreck him. That was not, fighting for position or anything like that. But yeah, just kind of some very strange looking wrecks that kind of reminded me of some other races here in the back markers. All right. Well, we'll move on into the midfield. P12, salvaging something for the Audi team was Gabby Bortoleto, even though it did not amount to any points. P11, the national show had a stat, and it's interesting. Haas in P11, Ollie Behrman comes home in P11. Haas is all time among the active teams. They are number 2 for coming home in P11 in their history for this number of races. They have, I forget who was number 1. Kevin Kelly will remind me when he listens to it, I'm sure. But I could not remember who it was, at least offhand, but it was Haas was the second most times they finished in P11. So unfortunately, no points there. P10 was Alex Albon in the Williams. Talk about a salvage job. P9, Carlos Sainz, the other Williams. Williams get double points out of this race when Carlos Sainz was having a lot of ranting on the radio all weekend long. He was not a happy bunny, but they come home with 3 big points for them. P8 was Charles Leclerc. We will have to talk about how he got down here. And P7, one of the stars of the day, man. The guy goes home, he gets inspired and puts in, we've been hammering on him all year too. Franco Colapinto, man, he came to play. P7 on merit. Good going, man. Cody, what's your thought here in the midfield?
Definitely did not see the Franco Colapinto P7 coming. I mean, Alpine has been certainly improved over where they were last year with their new car, but mostly it looked, so far this year, Gasly's been really doing more of the heavy lifting there at this team. So it was, really refreshing to see Colapinto, who, frankly, I haven't had too much faith in since he's come to the sport. He seems like a nice guy. I actually got to stand like 10 feet away from him when we went to COTA last year, which was pretty cool. He looks very young. It's very, very strange in person to be like, you see somebody like that in person, you're like, wow, you really are a Formula One driver and also, in my eyes, a child. But anyway, nice guy, young guy, hasn't really shown too much lately in the sport, but a lot of people are rooting for him. He's quite popular. And yes, it was very nice to see him actually on merit have a very good weekend here. He was a little helped out by Charles Leclerc, his end of race shenanigans.
The adventure of the last lap, which we will have to break down.
Yes. But he really was good this weekend. He was actually, generally better than Gasly throughout the whole weekend, and came away at the end with good points. So very happy to see that from him. The Williams drivers also actually getting some points, also maybe helped out a little bit by some mishaps from people who didn't end up finishing the race. But that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. And they managed to get some points out of it, which after, like you said, Carlos Sainz rant earlier in the weekend, I'm sure they were very happy to get what they could.
Yeah, so I mean, some salvage jobs in the midfield for sure. We're just going to lump Charles Leclerc in with the top 6 because that was probably where the main story of the races really were. So coming home in P6 was Lewis Hamilton. P5 was Max Verstappen, who had a very up and down day. P4 was George Russell. P3 was Oscar Piastri, who also had himself a very up and down day. P2 was Lando Norris, but it was not enough in the end. Kimi Antonelli, 3 in a row. Taking the win by 3.264 seconds. You look at this and you almost say, well, what's changed? But the answer is quite a lot because, wow, you would not know it from the results, but damn, lap 1, turn 1, absolute craziness. Max Verstappen does something I don't think I've ever seen, how he didn't get like tattooed by somebody from where he spun, does a 360 and kept it going, was amazing. Kimi Antonelli goes now here's where I'm going to get on the FIA just a little bit, because now look, we had the race last year in Saudi Arabia. You want to know how I knew that? Because Formula One put the Saudi Arabia race on YouTube and I rewatched it. Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri going into turn one. Max Verstappen goes off the track, keeps an advantage, gets a penalty. Kimi Antonelli, while yes, he doesn't maintain the lead, goes for a saunter on the teal part of the racetrack, comes back on. Yeah, he's P3, but nothing? That's not keeping an advantage. That's not gaining an advantage. He clearly cut like 2 corners. Everybody else maintained on there, including Max, who actually didn't go off the track when he spun. That's nothing? I don't know. What am I missing here, Cody? But anyway, do you break down the start? This was crazy.
As far as the Antonelli going off thing is, I think they didn't penalize him because he did technically go from P1 to P3. So you're already kind of penalizing yourself at that point by having gone off the track because you lost the positions. But I digress. Yeah, that start was crazy. And I was on the edge of my seat because I was sitting there ready for Max to take the lead and for me to like throw my hat, you know.
That was my prediction after qualifying. I said, okay, Antonelli is like 5 for 5 in not good starts. Even if he gets an okay start, I still think Max is going to get him. And sure enough, we almost got it.
The bigger problem, though, was, as expected, Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris right behind them had awesome starts. So they get off the line. It's pretty slow up front. Lando is trying to go to the inside of Max, and Max cuts him off. Charles Leclerc is trying to go in between Max and Antonelli, and you end up having both Max and Kimi lock up going into that. Now, Max is far enough to the inside that he keeps it on the track, but he's now like right up alongside of Charles, who's trying to take the lead. And Max, being Max, yields to no one at any time and was not about to let his chance to the lead slip through. Problem was, though, is by trying to hang with Charles, he ends up kind of going over the curb in a weird way. He got some tire spin, ends up spinning completely around. Admitted to it being his fault on the radio afterwards, but I agree with you. It was maybe part skill that he managed to get the car pointing in the right direction again, and a serious helping of luck that no one hit him throughout that whole ordeal. Slips way down the field, and at that point, I was kind of in a weird state of being happy with how exciting that beginning was, and also being like, well, like there
it goes. There goes my interest.
Thrown out the window.
Yeah.
Max ends up pitting early under that safety car that came from the pretty much the almost simultaneous crash of Hadjar and Gasly and Lawson. So he takes the early pit stop, goes the rest of the race on hards, trying to, make something work with that alternate strategy. Ends up, coming back to bite him at the end because the tires are too worn down and everyone is catching back up to him on fresher, hard tires. So he ends up finishing, I would say, P5, honestly, considering how much he lost there at the beginning. Pretty respectable finish. What was really cool to watch, though, as a result of that, is Max pretty much barging his way through the field after, he was doing his normal thing right after he spun around and stuff and was fighting for everything he could and pretty much trying to shove people out of the way and going super deep into the corners to try to pass and maintain. It was, pretty reckless Max Verstappen-esque driving. But it was kind of fun watching him make his way back through the field on a little fresher tires. And, he seemed to be a bit more excited about being in this car again, and which was refreshing to see. But he was not the only one that had a spin. At the end of the race, Charles Leclerc, who had started off in the lead but gradually lost pace to the Mercedes and the McLarens throughout the race, looked like he was on for a pretty good finish. In fact, potentially a podium. Try something a little weird going into the last lap where he seems to not be, if you go back and watch the footage, he wasn't really using the low downforce wing configuration on the car, it seemed like he was trying to let Piastri by so that he could have the overtake going into that last lap and hopefully have enough energy to actually take Piastri back and get the podium. But after Piastri got by him, he ended up spinning on his own, clips the wall just well enough to mess with his suspension, but keeps going
And has an adventure.
Yeah, was having a real hell of a time on that last lap, just trying to keep the car on the track, which he was not doing a great job of. He had to cut like 3 or 4 corners and ends up losing track position to George Russell and Max Verstappen there right at the end. And after the fact, ends up getting a whopping 20-second penalty for all of the corner cutting he was doing, which, a little bit of a strange way to word it. It was not driving the car under in an unsafe manner. That was what he actually got technically penalized for. It was driving off the track without a good reason to do so. A little bit of strange wording there, but definitely a pretty severe penalty. It ends up only costing him, 2 additional positions at that point. He gets passed after the fact by Lewis Hamilton and Franco Colapinto due to that whopping 20-second penalty. A lot of people have been comparing what happened here with what happened with Lewis Hamilton before, where I believe, what was that, Singapore, where his brakes were pretty much starting to fail at the end of the race, and he was cutting corners to pretty much try to make it to the end, and he got penalized for that, but it was only 5 seconds, and his brakes were failing. So it does seem to be a little unfair. Maybe the stewards have looked at that previous case and been like, yeah, maybe we really should have been a little more heavy-handed. 20 seconds is a lot.
Yeah.
I think maybe a 10-second would have been fair, considering, he was having trouble steering, but he could still steer well enough to get around the last lap, and his brakes worked. So I don't know. I felt like 20 seconds was pretty extreme.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm trying to bring it up, and I apologize it's not coming up, but I was trying to bring up all the decision documents that the stewards had to do after this race, and there's like 10 of them. And 9 out of the 10 turn out to be no further action. Yeah, Max bumping 10 different people on his way back up through the field, no further action for any of that. I already talked about the Antonelli at the beginning of the lap going way off for a saunter. No, that wasn't even noted, not even a thing, because that's probably lap 1. A whole lot of other stuff that was going on throughout the course of the race, all no further action. Leclerc, they decide to throw the book at. And I rewatched the onboard. I'm like, okay, how bad was this? He's really actually really struggling trying to keep the car, and he's going off because the other side of it was, I think it was Liam Lawson, was busy unlapping himself. And so he was trying to get in places, it looked like, out of the way so that Lawson and any other back markers who were unlapping themselves could do so. But then the other side of it is, when it came to finally Russell and the people for position who found him, he suddenly gets his ass back on the track and suddenly now gives it some gas to try to come home P6 on the road. So I get is it a penalty? Of course it is. Should they have thrown the book at him? I don't think so. I think that was a little much, especially given the fact that you were letting all this other stuff go. Like, if that's the precedent, then fine. Again, it's the inconsistency in the thing that drives us all mad when it comes to, we look at things, we look at what happened to Lewis Hamilton, and he was doing the exact same thing. If anything, he was going slower, but he had a big enough gap and there was nobody around him. Where here, yeah, there was people here. He's trying to get out of the way. What is he supposed to do? Like, if you're trying to tell him the better answer should be pull over and stop your car, fuck that. I want to score some points if I can on the last lap.
Yeah, honestly.
What are you asking him to do?
If you bring up a good point there, because even with his penalty, he finishes 8th place. He gets some points, whereas it sounds like what they wanted him to do was to, stop, and then you get no points. So
right.
I feel like it's like your message is kind of weird here. It's almost like, if you really thought it was that much of an issue and you thought that he should have stopped, then disqualify him. I mean,
Right.
that's really heavy-handed, but it seems kind of like that's what they wanted him to do. So you should essentially make that happen. And the weirder thing about all of this is because of, the way that they kind of phrased the penalty, that it wasn't related to unsafe driving. He ends up not, as far as I know, he didn't get any penalty points out of
No,
this
I've
either,
not seen any of
which
that.
is also kind of weird. But yeah,
if that was Max, they'd give him 4.
oh my God, yeah. So yeah, definitely some weird decisions made here on the penalties. Max Verstappen actually did get a 5-second penalty for something that happened much earlier in the race, where he, I guess, very slightly crossed over the pit line.
Why that had to be done at the end of the race is beyond me.
Yeah,
You're
me neither.
either in or you're not in the line.
Surely,
you know where the
as a
line
steward,
is.
You've got access to that footage. You can just look at it and be like, oh yeah, he went over.
He crossed the line. Okay, 5-second penalty. Why don't you tell him that? Give him an opportunity to do something about it. Now, as it turns out in the end, it didn't matter. Those 5 seconds didn't hurt him
and
where he finished, but it could
I
have.
really think that is why they gave him the penalty, because from what the commentators were saying, it was marginal. And it almost, by kicking that off until after the race, it almost kind of made it seem like they were waiting to see if it was actually going to make a difference or not. And since it wasn't with Leclerc's 20-second penalty, then they can be like, oh yeah, you broke the rules. Here's a 5-second penalty. But it doesn't change your position, so it doesn't really matter. Now, I bet you if Leclerc had not had some kind of penalty and had finished right behind him, they would have been kind of like, like, what do we do here? Because it's actually going to cost them some points. So they were kind of liberated in their decision making.
They were able to hedge because of how it finished. Yes,
yeah, exactly.
Totally.
But all of this doesn't even take into account the actual battle for the win.
We haven't even gotten to the fun part yet.
There was a legitimate battle. You had Leclerc, Lando, and Antonelli all fighting for the lead at,
this race had 5 different leaders.
Mm-hmm.
When's the last time you said that legitimately about a Formula One race, especially in Miami, that had 5 different leaders in it? And they were legit leaders. It wasn't like, maybe Max was a tire strategy thing, but still, he was there.
And it was, lots of good fighting for the lead. As I said before, Charles ends up kind of fading away with time because, the car's pace just wasn't there, and they were, kind of not really taking their drivers' opinions into account on the strategy and all that stuff. But
good to see the Ferrari decision desk back in mid-season form. That took a whole round to get back into there, man. Woo! And Leclerc was pissed.
But it really did come down to Lando and Kimi, and they both really could have won. Like, I thought Lando might really have a shot there because he was staying within 1 second of Antonelli for a while there, pretty much just staying right on the edge of that overtake threshold. And I thought, with the overtake that maybe he would, pick up some ground, but it really came down to that Antonelli overtook him on the pit stop sequence and, had the pace to hold off Lando. He did have to have that pace. And like you said earlier, Kimi Antonelli really had to work for this one because he had the defending champion breathing down his neck, and I'm sure really, really wanting to win this race.
Yes. So let's reset a little bit of the stage. The backdrop of all this is, again, the race got moved up 3 hours because of inclement weather that they thought was going to hit. There were showers all around parts of Miami, and it was a question of whether or not any of it was going to cross where the circuit was. And you would literally do a radar scan. I must have done like 10 of them. And Weather Channel would try to predict where it would go. And I'm like, oi, that's going to just miss, or it's going to deluge the circuit. And the way that the clusters of the storms were, it wasn't little rain. It was either nothing, or you were going to get what they would call class 3, class 4, and we were going to have carnage. So everyone was kind of very much trying to figure out what the weather was going to do. The reports went all over the place. I was listening to a lot of different team radios, and they were all over the place. So what Mercedes did, which I think gives them the win, is everyone seemed to think, at least the prevailing knowledge that I heard across the different radio, was that they thought lap 40 was going to be where there was going to be the best chance for rain if there was going to be some. So, of course, when you hear something like that, the natural engineer is going to say, well, I'm going to leave my driver out there as long as he can. I don't care about tire deg because it's better to go slower than have to do 2 pit stops.
Mm-hmm.
Kimi Antonelli said, enough of that. My mediums are dead because of all the stuff that happened on the crazy lap 1. Mercedes pulled the pin on lap 27. That then starts the chain reaction of Lando Norris having to cover him. So they came in on the next lap. They did cover him. But 2 things happened. The Mercedes stop was a little bit smoother, and Kimi Antonelli's outlap was amazing. I watched it on timing. It was full purple all the way across. And that's what got it. Lando gets out just in front, manages to hold him off for a couple corners, but the tire temperature is vastly different at that point. And Antonelli, with the extra boost and the overtake that he still has, because it's still sector 1, and that's where he was boosting, ends up overtaking Lando. Lando tries to fight back later on in the race. There was one point at which I think he got within 0.6 of a second. And I'm like, come on, we can maybe get there. And Kimi just kept the distance enough, despite complaining on the radio about some downshifting gearbox problems and just not feeling well in the car at the end. But the rookie did good. He's not a rookie anymore. I can't call him that anymore, really. But the young guy did good, and he's leading the world championship by now a hefty margin because of it. So Kimi Antonelli, my hat's off to you, man, because Lando wanted this one. And he was not exactly a happy camper. And I'm kind of in as a fan, in a conflicted zone. One, I'm glad to see my team was at least battling at the front and doing well. But at the same time, Lando makes a good point. Why were we not driving the strategy when we were out in front? Fair question to ask. And Mercedes just took it.
Yeah, he did say it on the radio immediately after the race, said we really should have won this one. And I think that they really could have if they had been a little more on top of the pit strategy, been able to more comfortably maintain that lead, for more than a couple corners, while tires get up to 10. They really could have done it. So that's two races in a row now where McLaren really could have won the race. I think this one was more on the strategy than just safety cars, which is really what gave Antonelli the track position for Japan. But yeah, they really could have done it. However, on the line, pretty much. Not on the line. Oscar Piastri had that move done before the Leclerc spin, but yeah, pretty much right at the very end, Piastri does make up the ground and get in for that podium position. So you do get a double McLaren podium out of this. Which
That's
really
true. I'm not going to be pissed off about double podium, man.
George Russell also makes up ground there right at the end. Pretty much Max was fading back to everybody at the end because of the worn hards, and he gets overtaken by Leclerc and Piastri and Russell eventually. Although it did get a little hairy for Russell there at the end too, because he gets booped by Leclerc during this whole thing and ends up kind of damaging his front wing, which is scraping along the ground and shooting sparks everywhere. And we're wondering if that was going to hold on, and it did just long enough. But yeah, it was pretty interesting, exciting race from start to finish, which was very refreshing.
Yeah, carnage at the beginning, carnage at the end. A Max Verstappen overtaking showcase, strategy, potential weather. The only thing we didn't have was any rain. Amazingly, the only thing it didn't do was rain. But a very entertaining, I think, Miami GP. Like I said, I'm kind of in the conflicted zone because, should I be a little more upset like Lando? Maybe I should be. But I'm also just happy that we had a good race. We had some entertainment. It kind of clapped back. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of these regulations by any stretch of the imagination, I'm glad that at least we saw, to me, the defining race of the turbo hybrid era when it first happened was the Bahrain duel between Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton, when they had that ding-dong back and forth. Yeah, they were 25 seconds clear of everybody else, but you finally saw, hey, these guys can still race these cars. We saw some real racecraft. It was a fun race. There was, a mixed up, kind of a result, kind of what you saw here. So, but here, I actually think if you're a fan of McLaren or Red Bull or even Ferrari, you should be enthused because the gap to the Mercedes did get a lot tighter. That having been said, Mercedes are bringing their big updates to the next round, and we're going to see what happens after that. So maybe I'm speaking too soon. Like, you can look at it one way. You can look at it and say, hey, at least these guys all know how to develop cars. The other side is we might have just taken our best shot at the king and we missed. I don't know.
That is true, but this is also after this last race. Now we are into the first break for what they're calling ADUO, which is the engine development, pretty much. So now I don't know exactly when it's supposed to happen in this 3-week duration, but they're supposed to now take a look at the engine performance of all the competitors and find out who has the best engine and then how far everyone is behind. And, some teams are going to be able to get some engine upgrades out of this.
That's true,
depending on who gets those upgrades and how, big the difference is that they can make, you still might see people catching up to Mercedes. It seems pretty clear to me that Mercedes has the best engine, or at the very least, the best know-how for deployment of energy. So, it all kind of depends on how they're going to analyze these engines and what they're going to really use as the criteria for best engine. But, some teams, Ferrari seems to think that they'll be getting, an upgrade out of this. God knows, Honda and Audi.
Honda should get you.
Yeah. So they'll be bringing some upgrades to their cars. Fingers crossed that Red Bull manages to get in on that. But we'll just have to see. And I'm waiting and watching to see what they say is like the tier list and who's going to get how many upgrades. I'm excited to see, because that's the other thing that might come out of Canada is you might see people now bringing engine upgrades, and maybe not that soon, but I know any team who's expecting to get upgrades probably has them pretty well down the pipe. So we might see them in time for Canada.
So lots, like I said, we needed this. It was a good race. It was a fun race, and there's a lot to talk about moving forward. And we're going to do that in just a little bit. So we're going to take a quick break. We will re-rack. We will come back. We will tell you what this did to the standings in both the drivers and the constructors. And then we will open it up to your thoughts on what you saw this weekend in the fan email segment. We've got some of our usual folks here. We'll hand out some awards. We will talk about predictions, and we will set the stage. The Canadian GP beckons. Everyone's going to get on trucks and literally climb up the Appalachians from Miami to Montreal. But anyway, and it's going to take them a whole 3 weeks to get there. So good going scheduling gods yet again. But anyway, I digress. We'll come back. We'll get back into it just a little bit. Come on back. You will not want to miss it. You are listening to the Outlap F1 podcast, and we'll be right back after this quick pit stop. Grab your Flu powder, broomstick, or apparate to your favorite audio streaming service to join the discussion on Hogwarts, a podcast, where Dan and his friends have in-depth chapter-by-chapter breakdowns of each Harry Potter novel. Join the group as they dive into the magical world and discuss plot points, analyze character development, and occasionally go off the rails. Whether you're a muggle who's new to the series or a pure-blood wizard who won't need a remember-all, Hogwarts, a podcast, brings everyone to the Great Hall for a magical discussion. Hogwarts, a podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, welcome back on in. This is Season 8, Episode number 8, Crazy Eights on the docket. This is of the Outlap F1 podcast. It's our 2026 Miami GP review show. You've got Andy on along with Cody tonight, and we just wrapped up talking about a very entertaining, very enthralling from start to finish with Bookend Carnage Miami Grand Prix. So, what did this do to the standings? Cody, if you, as always, would take the top 10 of the drivers, I will handle the teams.
All right. Your drivers' standings leader is still Kimi Antonelli, and with his third win in a row, all of which followed a second place and some decent sprint race performances, Kimi Antonelli is now at an even 100 points at the top of the standings for Mercedes. Just behind him, or a little more than just behind him at this point, is His teammate George Russell and the other Mercedes sitting at 80 points. So I still predict this will be a good fight between, at the very least, the two of them going forward. But right now, that's a pretty healthy 20-point gap with Kimi Antonelli in the lead that maybe we weren't really expecting going into this season. Charles Leclerc, a little bit of a gap down to him in third place, but he's still holding strong with Ferrari at 59 points. Lando Norris, we got to remember that he didn't even start one of the Grand Prix. So, in fact, Lando's in fourth for McLaren at 51 points is pretty good. Tied with him, but behind on countback is Lewis Hamilton in fifth place in the other Ferrari, also at 51 points. Oscar Piastri, who didn't even start two races, still doing pretty well for
100% podiums for Oscar Piastri this year in the races he
100%
starts.
podiums from races he started.
Yes, exactly.
But that's still pretty good. A lot of drivers would be very happy with that. So Piastri making a comeback now that the car is starting races. Sixth place at 43 points. A little bit of a gap again down to seventh place Max Verstappen, who has had his best showing of the season so far in terms of vehicle performance. Now let's stop having lap one spins. Max Verstappen, seventh place, Red Bull Racing, 26 points. Oliver Behrman still holding on to eighth place in the driver's standings for Haas at 17 points. Pierre Gasly probably could have taken that eighth place had he not had a crazy crash this weekend. Pierre Gasly in ninth place, Alpine at 16 points, so just 1 point behind Behrman. And then Liam Lawson also had a rough weekend this time out, but still in the top half of the driver's standings, 10th place for Racing Bulls at 10 points.
All right, your constructor standings. No surprise who is in P1. That would be Mercedes. They have won all of the Grand Prix races to date so far. P2, they are on 180 points, by the way, an amazing total for them. P2 is Ferrari. They check in with 110 points and now have to be looking behind them as the now hard-charging McLaren team, who gained 31 points in this weekend on Ferrari. So they have closed the gap. They are up to 94 points on the season for them. P4 is Red Bull Racing. They check in with 30 points. P5 is Alpine. On the strength of the Franco Colapinto, P7 actually is maintaining P5 in the constructors. 23 points for them. P6 slipping a little bit. No points for them this weekend. Despite a really good start to the season overall, is Haas. They are on 18 points. P7 is Racing Bulls. They check in with 14 points. P8, the 3 points, very significant for Williams this weekend. No doubt about that. They're up to 5 points. P9 is Audi. They check in with 2 points. And P10 and 11, 0 points respectively. But Cadillac, not in last place, have to be at least somewhat happy with that. But P11 is the Aston Martin squad. The vibration problem fixed. They will now start to focus on performance moving forward for them, but also 0 points. All right, so you have heard our takes on the Miami GP that was. It is now time for the fan email segment to open it up to your thoughts on what you saw this weekend. We've got our regulars here. We will start, as always, or not as always, but with Rachel Fleming, who was kind enough to chime in first. We've got Dave Doherty in here as well. Cody, what do we have to say in the fan email segment? What you got?
All right. First one comes in from Rachel Fleming. Thank you, Rachel. And she says, who needs the rain? What a great race. So many changes for the lead, a fight to the end, and good news stories for a lot of teams. Plus, what an epic ending. I really hope Kimi's Europe curse doesn't hit him again because he looks on it at the moment. Canada will be a real test. Great to see the McLarens looking good as well. Norris was on it right to the end, and Piastri was quick as well. God knows where Max will actually be classified due to this ridiculous did he cross the line or not. It's either yes, he did, or no, he didn't. None of this investigation after the race, or none of this needs to be investigated after the race. By the way, I don't think he was deserving of driver of the day. Kimi or Colapinto should have been there. Audi Watch, what a dreadful weekend. DSQs and problems with the car as well. Borton Hulk must pray something improves in the next 3 weeks. Perez Watch must have heard my comments about him in China, as after that, he had been much better and beat Stroll. Alonso Watch was the best of the 4 rubbish bins, or the supposed F1 cars. But still, finally, after all that excitement, we still have a 3-week break to the next race. Cody, have a great holiday. Oh, thank you very much. I guess Rachel says she is going away as well during that break. Enjoy your holiday as well, Rachel. And last thing she says is, By the way, Charles gets a 20-second penalty while Max gets a 5-second penalty. Utterly ridiculous. Now, I will say at the end there, it's two very different penalties. You got one driver that goes a little over the white line, leaving the pits, and you got one driver wheeling a 3-legged car around a lap, barely keeping it on the track. I did say before 20 seconds was a little extreme, but in my opinion, these should not both be the same time. One should definitely be worse, and it is Charles. Hate to say it on that.
No, I think what she's more pissed off about is the timing of it. Like, I get you got to investigate the Charles one after the race because it happened on the last lap. But why are you even bothering with the Verstappen one when it's not in the middle of the race? That's either an in or an out that should have been done. Should have been able to respond to it, in my opinion, as well. So I don't know, but I don't mean to speak for Rachel there, but that was kind of how I read it.
I gotcha. We did touch on a lot of this stuff already. The Kimi Europe curse that happened last year is something I had completely forgotten about. Once the racing went to Europe, kind of as it tends to do in the middle of the season, Kimi Antonelli definitely had a little bit of a rough spot in Europe last year. Obviously, Mercedes has a much more competitive car this year, so we might see some better stuff out of him. But George Russell also tends to go very well in the European races, so that might bring them more into a better close fight, as we are all looking forward to see, despite the fact that I really like Kimi Antonelli, and I'm not exactly the biggest fan of George Russell. I do think George is an awesome driver. I would really like to see him have a legitimate shot at the championship. So I just hope that, they're able to battle between the two of them instead of just one of them romping off, because that'll make it pretty boring for most of us, unless you're a massive Antonelli fan.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of good points. It would have been really interesting to see where Max would have finished, I think, had he not had the spin. And that was kind of one of those, like, the way that I saw it was, I think Max, who's probably really good at doing, like, multiple things at once, I think he bit off one more thing than he could probably chew. Because it looked like he was trying to do 4 things. He's trying to hold off Lando and race Charles and race Kimi. And he tried to do 4 things at once. Right, and keep it on the track. And one physics and said no more. No matter how good you are, sometimes physics just does that thing. So, and the fact that he admitted to it and what it was, I thought he was very candid about it. He says, hey, he's got a future in rally driving if he ever wants to try that too. So, but I to be honest, like, moving forward, I'm marking Red Bull now going to be consistently as a top 6, certainly in the top 6 contenders for wins, especially given where we're going. I mean, Canada's a lot of straights, and that rear wing, man, brings them back. They're going to have the straight line edge amongst a lot of teams. I mean, I even heard, it was interesting, Zach Brown was on the Sky feed, and they asked him about that wing, and he didn't dismiss it. So I have a funny feeling by the end of this year, maybe by next year, we're going to see a lot of flippy wings amongst these cars next year, because I think it's just a solution that has to happen.
Let's just go to Monza right now. No more upgrades. Skip right to Monza. But I do agree too that I really wish I also could have seen where he would finish. I don't think they had the pace overall to win compared to Mercedes and McLaren, but I do think he could have really been on for a podium had things played out a little better. So, but we'll never know though. We'll just have to see how it goes in Canada. Yeah, a lot of your watches here, Rachel, are a little painful at the moment. Perez is probably living his best life, honestly, because we had no expectations really for the Cadillac team, and he gets to come back to the sport and race around again, and
he gets to collect on the apology tour where everybody who sees him says, "We're so sorry, we misjudged you."
And honestly, even though Bottas is ahead of him in the driver's standings because of kind of a somewhat of a fluke finish earlier on, Perez generally has had the better of Bottas so far this season. So yes, I would definitely say we are kind of going back on the apology tour for Perez, and he's back in Formula One, so he's got to be doing all right. Alonso, I can't say the same thing about. He's probably hating every minute of this, thinking that what has gone wrong? We had the money, we had the brains. How has this all turned out so poorly? And I gotta wonder when he's going to throw in the towel, because he's not going to do this forever. And I know he wants to go out on a high note, but right now that high note is nowhere in sight. Yeah. And eventually he's going to throw in the towel.
You just have a funny feeling the epitaph of that guy's career is he just didn't have good timing. Because he leaves and the place suddenly, it's not his fault either. Like, okay, the 07 McLaren thing, some of that was his fault. I'll be honest there. He was being a dick and he knew it. But after that, he did legit, and he has tried over the years to really rebuild his image and his career and his reputation. And he can still drive a car, but damn, like how many reclamation projects do you have to go through before you finally just say, I can't do this anymore?
I mean, his reputation as one of the greatest of all time drivers, I think, is pretty rock solid. But he's also got that reputation of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right. Just not reading rooms well. But anyway,
yes.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll move on to Dave Doherty. Cody, what has he got to say?
All right, Dave. Thank you, Dave, for your email. He says, hi, team. Well, this is what I call a sensible thinking from F1 and the FIA. The regs look very spot on, in my opinion. They're definitely better. I don't know about spot on, but they're definitely better. Quali and the race day traditional format was very impressive. At a track that has been so-so over the years, I thought the Red Bull and Ferrari back wings were brilliant. And Mercedes, my love, Kimi Antonelli, that kid is good. I'm happy. Any thoughts on Red Bull and McLaren's race, since you're fans of those two? Well, we definitely dug into that pretty good with, I am very happy with the advances that Red Bull made, and I was very happy with Max being on the front row. But it is kind of a story of what might have been with Max spinning out on lap 1. And yeah, McLaren looked to be right there during the sprint stuff, but it turns out that Mercedes was probably just still trying to figure stuff out while McLaren had already nailed things like deployment. And, by the time that everyone was all figuring out the strategies for deployment and everything like that, Mercedes ends up being right back at the front again. But I am still very happy it's close. Like, we saw Mercedes romp away with it in Australia and China, and I was going, God damn it, is this what the whole season's going to be? It was fun when my guy was doing it, now it sucks. But yes, it is definitely much closer in Japan and now even closer in Miami, I would say. So if this trend continues, then this could be a very exciting season, despite the fact that a lot of people are not a big fan of the regulations, myself included. I think my biggest issue with the regulations is it's just too complicated. You've got too much stuff going on with the deployment and the recharging and the differences of where you're doing on the track, and that it's all computer controlled. And then you got the active aero, and you've got boost mode and overtake mode, and it's a lot. I like to think I'm a somewhat smart guy, and it's a little distracting for me. So, and I'm a pretty diehard Formula One fan at this point. For someone who is a casual viewer, pops in for the race here and there, it might be a little hard to figure out what's going on still. So that's my biggest gripe with it. But I do still appreciate that they looked at the first couple races and were like, yeah, some of those things we worried about actually came true. What can we do about it? And I think that they're taking steps in the right direction. So I don't think this is a write-off year. I think that we can still have a very exciting, fun Formula One season this year, and they'll just continue to refine what they can refine. And then, oh yeah, by the way, I don't know if you heard, but we're getting V8s in 2031.
Yeah.
We've only got to deal with it probably for a few more years.
What did I tell y'all about Mohammed Ben Sulayem licking his chops and is waiting to just impose his will? And that came out. That story is happening because the Concord Agreement is done as of 2030. So the FIA can say, this is our rule package. You either sign up or you go down the road and you race your cars somewhere else, but you don't do it here. So a lot of off track to be decided between now and then. Do I think we've made a step in the right direction? Yes. My jury is out on the actual changes because this track was never going to be an energy management problem anyway. We might have gotten this with the original rule set and it might have looked fine. We might have been totally fine. However, I do think what they've done, given the constraints of what they had to do, is a step in the right direction. I've heard that seems to be positive across the board. That my jury is going to come out in Canada because Canada's going to be is already, just you look at the topography, there's going to be a lot of chances to see energy starving. And we're probably going to see, this is where I think you're going to see the super clipping come back a little bit. And how bad is it? Is it enough to where you can just kind of swallow hard and deal with it? Or is it like, oh my God, that car sounds like it's going to die? I don't know.
We did even still get some super clipping in Miami. Like if you're watching the onboards when they're going down the longest straight there in Miami, you can definitely hear the revs cut back, get into like the last bit of the straight, but it definitely wasn't as bad. But like you said, this wasn't a track where that was probably ever going to be a big issue. So
right when you would start to hear it, there would be a corner that would show up and you'd be like, okay, now they have to gear down anyway. So now it wasn't going to be quite as bad. Canada's not going to be like that, especially coming into the couple of straights, the corner of champion, the wall of champions, where that is, it's 2 long straights with a little tiny chicane. You're going to hear the engine struggling, I think, a little bit around there. But if Canada can be a good show, and my jury is also still kind of out on the yo-yoing. Like, I like it in some cases, and it was interesting what Leclerc tried to do. He tried to anti-yo-yo it because he figured it out that, like, oh, if you try to pass me in turn 17, I can get you back in turn 1, and because I'm going to hit my deployment after you've already hit yours. That's interesting from a certain way. I agree with what you also said, Cody, about it being overcomplicated. I like to think I know what's going on. When I have to read regulations and technical manuals 3 times before I go, they did what? And I sit here and go, now I then try to explain it to other people. Like if I'm sitting at a race and I'm trying to explain to somebody why did Max Verstappen spin like that when that looks horribly uncharacteristic? Why does Leclerc spin on his own with nobody around him? It comes down to that deployment and the car physically not being able to do what the driver is asking of it. That having been said, but to try to explain that story is hard. Like it's not a quick, easy story where with more simpler regulations, it's going to be easier. Oh, he hit the boost and the boost went too bad. I could tell that story. But if I got to say, oh, he was in overtake mode and the straight line mode was going and he had boost and overtake at the same time and he hit the button twice, it becomes very difficult to try to communicate that story. I do think we're trying to do the best we can. I do think it's a step in the right direction. My jury is still out, though, on these regs, at least for the rest of the year. But I'm still confident. I'm hopeful. I'm not confident yet, but I'm hopeful that we can have an actual championship fight and good, fun races all year long.
I agree. I do have one more point before we move on. You mentioned the yo-yoing. I don't mind the yo-yo dynamic on the track so much as it drives me crazy to hear it mentioned on the broadcast 1,000,000 times every race. If I hear pass and repass like one more time, I'm going to like lose it because you hear it so many times every time they do it during the race still. And it's like, okay, we know that that's how they race. We can stop saying yo-yo or pass and repass. Like,
well, I've delayed my celebration watching the timing because I'm like, okay, there's the pass. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready. Does he repass it? No, like the Piastri one, I was like all ready for Leclerc to go past. I'm like, okay, did he actually pass him? Oh, he did. He made it stick. Okay, I can celebrate now. But anyway.
Thank you again,
yes, thank you
Dave
guys.
and Rachel, for your emails. We really like hearing from you guys, and we hope to hear more.
Absolutely. All right, so we will move on to our awards. We will start with the rubbish. I was actually in a really good mood. This one was actually hard for me to do. Normally, this one's easy. This one is where I like to go off and do an Andy rant. I don't really have one. I just felt bad for this guy. Poor Alan McNish. Oh my God. You could not have made his debut more difficult, Audi. Wow. The Hulkenberg engine explodes on the sprint. They don't get the car back. They barely get it together to go to qualifying. And then poor Gabby Bortoleto gets disqualified. And it just seemed like there was just technical hurdle after technical hurdle. And for a guy that I really liked and enjoyed hearing his perspective on, he had himself a tough weekend. I just felt bad for him. Audi did not have a good weekend. Yikes. Woo. Cody, what you got?
My rubbish award is going to go to Isaac Hadjar. And it's not even really all directed. The rubbish is not all on Isaac Hadjar. He just had a really shitty weekend. The getting disqualified from qualifying for the car not being put together the right way. I mean, that's not on him. That's on the team. But so then, it's a rough spot starting at the back of the field, starting from the pit lane. But he had a really good opportunity to show, what he's made of and work his way up through the field and make some good moves. And he took himself out all on his own. You can't really debate that was his fault. He turned too early and he ran into the wall. So definitely a mistake on him. Doesn't look great, but hoping for his sake that he bounces back.
Yeah, no, I could understand why you would pick him there. It was very reminiscent of the "I am stupid." That's what I almost yelled that at my TV. I went, "Oh my god, he's stupid and he knows it, and he's banging on the steering wheel." Ay, ay, ay. All right, so we'll move on to analysis paralysis. I'll go first with this one. Boy, does it feel good to have that Ferrari decision desk back in mid-season form. When Charles Leclerc is asking, "My God, guys, I'm driving here. Why don't you ask me what I think before you screw my race up?" That would be helpful. You might want to take the memo. You have two very experienced drivers in Charles Leclerc and in Lewis Hamilton. Maybe their weight should carry a little bit here and there.
They are the ones sitting in the car.
Yeah, maybe kind of, sort of. But Cody, what you got?
My analysis paralysis is going to go to all the teams watching that weather forecast because it was really cracking me up. We had just about every team come over the broadcast at some point being like, "Hey, we think that the rain is coming in like 10 laps and it's going to be really heavy. Hey, we think the rain's going to come around lap 40 and it's going to be really light. Hey, we think there might be like a little sprinkle at first around turn 7 and 8. And none of this ever really happened. So it just kind of seemed every team was like, chiming in with rain coming in X laps with Y intensity. And it cracks me up a little that anyone who thought rain was coming kind of missed the mark.
Yeah, I mean, it was very tough forecast, I think, all the way around. Like, when Weather Channel says it was 85%, like I always say, that's for the day. Yes, is it going to rain at some point during the day? But when does it actually come? Does it affect the race? That type of thing. Part of me was kind of glad we didn't get that because it probably would have meant carnage. We haven't seen these cars really handle the wet. And I don't know that a deluge or class 3 rain is the first time I really want to see these cars in the wet.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind like knowing we have a wet session where it's the rain has stopped and we're puddles and we're dealing with it. That would be a perfect good time to learn how to drive these cars in the wet. I don't think in the middle of a Grand Prix, but that's just me. But other people love chaos, and that's fine. And if you didn't get your chaos, I'm sorry. But you had the first lap and the last lap, and you should be satisfied with that. Anyway, all right. So we'll move on to our dark horse of the day. I'm going to give this one to Franco Colapinto, a guy who I really hadn't thought of very much for this award up until this weekend, but he had himself a pretty darn good showing. P7 on the day, Alpine looking a lot better. There's a follower I have on Twitter who's got to be a lot happier. He's a big Alpine guy. He was dying last year. He's got to be feeling a lot better now. Alpine looking pretty good. Cody, what you got?
Yeah, I am 100% in agreement. My dark horse is also Franco Colapinto. Got into that position on merit, had himself a really good weekend. And, these are the types of things that can sometimes give a driver, that the boost of confidence that they need to then continue to perform better going forward. And I really hope that happens with him. There's no, in my opinion right now in Formula One, there's no drivers that I just straight up don't like or think are jerks. Everyone is competitive and, trying to do their thing. And Franco Colapinto, I think, kind of getting into the sport, maybe he kind of stumbled into a good thing, but he's really trying to make the most of it to stay in the sport, just like Liam Lawson and Isaac Hadjar are doing. And I really think that this was a good showing from him. So I hope there's more good to come.
Yeah, definitely. And the entire country of Argentina will be thrilled. There's, when we were at COTA, there was a contingent of people who came to see him, and he wasn't even driving. People were climbing the pit wall and screaming his name, and he wasn't even necessarily even driving a race car that weekend. But yeah, it's very fun. All right, driver of the day. Cody, I'll let you go first here. What do you have here?
I really wanted to say Max Verstappen, but that spin on lap 1 kind of undoes it for me. So yeah, my heart says Verstappen, but my brain is what I'm going to go with, and that says Kimi Antonelli because he's got the turkey. He's got 3 in a row now, and this one he really had to fight for. He had to go up against Lando Norris, champion of the world, and he came out on top. So yeah, to me that says driver of the day.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it was a very for all the talk of how easy the overtakes are. That was a hell of a defense. I mean, that was a defense for like 25 laps or over almost 30 laps on one set of tires with a hard charger who knows how to overtake right on your rear end, and he managed to hold him off. The other bit, he's in some rarefied air. What was the stat I saw? What was it? Schumacher, Senna, and now Antonelli to win 3 in a row like that? Yeah, so I mean, definitely some very rarefied air. So my driver of the day is going to be Kimi Antonelli for the defense, for keeping it together. He could have lost it. Kind of saw some social media stuff after the sprint where he had a bad start and really didn't have a really good day. And people were saying, oh, that's the inexperience coming out and all this other stuff. But what does he do? He gathers it back up. 2 hours later, he goes out, he puts it on pole. And then in the race, after yet another bad start, like that's the only thing I see wrong with him right now. If he nails the starts, these races are done. But like that's the only hope that these other guys have got to do is they got to get in front of him. They got to keep him behind because once he gets that car in clean air, it's another story, man. He knows how to do it.
Previous stats also indicate that Antonelli probably has a pretty good shot at winning this championship because I think the one I saw was that a driver has won 3 of the first 4 races 24 times in F1 history, and 21 of those times they've gone on to win the championship. So pretty good odds in his favor there.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty good odds. We will see. We got a long way to go, though. We haven't had seasons this long. And
that is true.
There is also, and this is minor rumblings, but I have read, and this is a story that will not go away. There is a chance that the Saudi Arabian race may come back. In the latter part of the schedule, there's been talk about it. They said it was suspended. They were always very coy when they said Bahrain and Saudi Arabia were not going to happen in April because that's a government that really wants that race to happen. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of things to happen in the world to try to make that happen, but they have time on their side, and there's a window late in the schedule. You may have a quadruple header to finish the season. That's where
that would be intense.
Exactly. So we will see. Way in the rumor mill. It is not confirmed by any stretch of the imagination, but it's one of those stories that every now and again it keeps churning back up. So there has to be some smoke to that if people are still reporting on it. So, but anyway. We'll put that little nugget out there for you. So we may have a 23 race season after all. Bahrain appears to not be anywhere near coming back, at least from everything that I've read. But anyway, we will transition into our predictions. Cody, you had a very good weekend, despite our lap times being way off. But you got the pole sitter. You nailed Kimi Antonelli there. You got the fastest quality time because you were quicker than me. You got P1 on the podium, and you got P3 on the podium. Oscar Piastri getting it done for you there late. It gives you 4 points on the weekend. I was around all of the podium. I had 2 McLarens in the top 3. I just had them in the wrong dang order. But anyway, I only got 1 point. I only got the fastest lap time because I was a little bit quicker than you there. So you are now on the board, officially your first win of the season. I have a 2-1-1 record right now. So I have 2 wins. You have 1 win. We each have a draw because we tied. I think it was China that we tied. All right. So, well, I hate how the schedule works, man. You had this 5-week break. We get a race. We're all excited. And now we got to take another break when like Canada's like right there. Why couldn't we wouldn't this be the time to do the back to whatever? Anyway, a couple week break before the Canadian GP. Cody, I know you're prepping to go to the other side of the planet. I have to figure out what I'm going to be doing in that time. Anyway, have fun if I don't get a chance to see you. Any final thoughts?
I certainly will have fun. And believe it or not, I am going to try to get my Formula One races in while I'm abroad. They're going to be probably on like really odd times for Japan, like middle of the night. So provided that I am not dead ass exhausted every day, which is entirely possible, I will try to watch them. I did If
I'm getting texts from you, I'm gonna give you like the mad respect emoji back.
when I went to Japan before, when I was on the cruise ship, I remember that I was so ecstatic to find out that they were going to be airing the British Grand Prix just on the TVs on the cruise ship. And I was like, hell yeah, I get to chill on a cruise ship and watch Formula One. This is glorious. And it was on at like midnight. I was so tired. I watched I fell asleep before the race started. I woke up at like lap 4 and watched like 6 laps, and then next thing I knew, I'm waking up and the race is over. So I don't really know how that's going to go, but I will be abroad for Canada, or at least Canada is going to be going on as I'm traveling. We'll be gone for Monaco, and then what's the last one? Spain will be right as I'm coming back. So unfortunately, you won't be probably having me join you for the next bunch of podcasts. You might have to rope someone else in for that.
I'm working on one for Canada that may be a very interesting thing to those who listen to the show a while ago. I don't know if it's going to happen. It's still in the prelim stage, but we may have a special guest for the Canadian Grand Prix, at least the review part of it. I assume if we're going to do a preview, I can probably shepherd those. I can kind of read what the news stories are, do the track facts, and do the rest of that anyway. So I will probably be the sole preview person, at least moving forward. Whether or not we can get some other people to talk back to me is another problem, because I will also be in the hinterlands of Wisconsin for 2 of those weekends, which will be the Monaco one. I'll be leaving that Saturday, and we'll probably have a recap. I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to figure something out. I will make time to probably do a recording. It may be shorter. They probably won't be as in depth, especially if I'm talking to myself in a cabin in the Northwoods. But anyway, it'll be entertaining. So anyway, you won't want to miss that. We'll figure out what we're going to do. Life will happen. We will come back. And don't worry, we're not going to abandon this season by any stretch of the imagination. I'm too invested in it at this point, and so are you. So there we go. But anyway, until then, stay safe out there, ladies and gentlemen. It's a crazy world. It only seems to get crazier some days. But as always, may all your laps be fast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Outlap F1 podcast. If you like what you heard, click that subscribe button and be sure to leave us a 5-star review. If you want to connect with us outside of the show, check out our website at www.outlapf1.com. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at OutlapF1 Podcast, or email us at chatnow@outlapf1.com. As always, thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you on the next one.